everyone who's joined this session. My name is Cheryl Kaiser. I am the Executive Director of the Lewis Institute and the Babson Social Innovation Lab. And for those of you who may not know who Babson College is, we are a small college west of Boston, and we're only a business school. However, when I say we're only a business school, we are the #1 school in entrepreneurship in the world. And we have been #1 ever since rankings on entrepreneurship education. So I'm really honored to be here, and particularly honored because one of our speakers is a recipient of a Babson Award called the Social Innovators Award, Mick Jackson. And when I thought of doing a values and action session in this summit, there wasn't a person that came to mind before anyone other than Mick, and then we will be doing a second one with another incredible Babson person, Savitha, but we'll talk about her in a little bit. But right now, what I really want to say is when I look at the values, the RISE values of responsible, inclusive, sustainable, and eco-friendly, what excites me about those values is they really are living. And I took this off of the RISE site, and I think it's really, really a great way to start our conversation. Values are drivers of positive change and are a part of every individual and organization to a varying degree. It creates the basis of a framework for collaboration and collective impact for the greater good, shaping a society and its culture. And so I'm so honored to have Mick Jackson, the founder of the Wildhearts Group, and Robin Sundaram, who is the responsible supply lead at Nestle UK. And we're going to be in conversation because the both of them live their values and live their values individually as well as leaders in their organizations, but also they live their values in everything that they do. So I'm going to start the way that we always start at the Lewis Institute, because it's important when we ground a conversation in values that we really understand who the individual is, because it's really the individual and that leader that expresses the values. So Mick, I'd like to ask you first, can you just tell us what calls you to do what you do in life? What calls you to your leadership in the world?
Yeah, just a small question to start off then, right?
Yeah, it's a minor question.
I've thought about this a lot, because of when we worked together on Microcycle, etc., and we discussed the power of values and your why. And to me, when people talk about their why and why they do what they do, it really just is a shorthand way of saying what they're driven by, what their values are. I think it's a lot to do with my upbringing. In the west coast of Scotland, I was descended from effectively immigrants from Ireland. I know a lot of people in Boston can relate to that, but also the other half were from the Highlands, which were kind of like immigrants coming down to the centre of Scotland, these Highlanders. My grandfather was a miner when he was 11 years old. At the height of the British Empire, he was down a mine and he was just a kid. And I grew up with these people who had come from nothing. So I always had this sense of the underdog and of our need to look out for each other in society. That was one half of my upbringing, if you will. My mother was also descended from Irish immigrants, but she had a real fire in her guts and she was the entrepreneur in the family. So I watched my mum set up a business when I was 3 and overcome the odds to build that up. And I think how I manifested that with WildHearts was this idea of the love of entrepreneurship and the love of the creative process. Like I was a professional musician until I was 25. And when I really dug into the entrepreneurship, the manifestations of entrepreneurship that I love, and this value that kept popping up in my life was creativity. I have to be creating something new and I have to feel creative. So I see entrepreneurship as a form of creativity. There's other forms of business that I wouldn't say are so creative, and I'm not drawn to them. I'm specifically drawn to the creative element. Wealth creation is a form of creativity, but in its DNA is this idea that we can't live to extract value from the world. We have to serve it and give value to the world. And that was because of the other half of my upbringing, which was all about the people who'd come from nothing and knew what it meant to have nothing. And so my dream was to combine both, if you will.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And I'm going to come back to you around what was the value that helped you start Wild Hearts. Robin, what calls you to do what you do in the world and to live into your leadership?
Um, in some ways, a few similarities to Mick as well. But for me, I'll start at the other end. I mean, the value I can see the SDGs are behind you, the global goals. And I think number 10, the inequalities, is the one that is probably the one that drives me most. And again, it's back to my background. I mean, I grew, I'm from immigrants. My parents were from Sri Lanka. I came to the UK when I was 10 months old. And so from a very early age, you're growing up, and particularly back in the sort of 70s and 80s, you could really see the inequalities in all its forms, whether it be your race or your sexual orientation or your gender, and those inequalities still are there now, but I was growing up seeing it. And at the same time, my dad was a big influence in the way that he brought us up. I'm the oldest of 4 boys, and he brought us up really understanding how you've got to look out for each other. So we lived in a small house in Wimbledon, and my dad, and so we were kind of squashed into these small rooms, and we would share, and 3 of us would be sharing a bedroom. And one of the reasons for that is my dad would still always keep a room available for Sri Lankan students when they came to the UK. He would look after them, and he would put them up, and he'd put 2 of them up in a room. And so we grew up with this feeling of, you've really got to do what you can to look out for other people. And as I said, at the same time, sort of this dual realization that we live in an unequal world, and what can I do to try and level the playing field? So that's probably the key drivers that I would say for myself.
Great. And I want to hear more about how you see that in transparent supply chains and what you do. And so let's go back now, Mick. The main goal of the Wildhearts Group is to alleviate poverty through compassionate entrepreneurship. And on your LinkedIn, you actually say, if you share our values, get involved and join us. So what are we getting involved in? What are we joining? What is the Wildhearts Group? What is that system and portfolio, that ecosystem that Robin and Nestle has joined and chosen to be part of? So tell us about the Wildhearts Group.
Coming from an entrepreneurial background, I didn't come from, as we would call it in the UK, the third sector, the charitable background. That wasn't my profession. I'd always, after I stopped being a professional musician, I started setting up businesses. Again, the link to creativity, music, and creating businesses, in my mind, is the same thing, right? And so coming from that, you go to what you feel you can do. When I was compelled to try and do whatever I could to try and alleviate poverty, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, my go-to place was, well, I'll set up businesses to do it. I had no idea there was a thing called social enterprise. I just felt it was something I wanted to do. And so I set up, the goal was to create an organization that would create and launch companies, and through their activities and the wealth they generated would address inequality. And I wanted to prove that you could do it with the most mundane products. Or the most mundane concepts. The first thing I said was, what is the one thing in the office that everybody uses and no one cares about? And it was office supplies and envelopes and pens and paper and all that stuff. And I said, well, if I set up a business that sells that, but its purpose, its founding DNA is to alleviate economic injustice, will people buy it from us? And, it took off. And it now grew, okay, we're in challenging times, but we still grew at 51% last year in a market that's moribund. But, and this is the interesting thing about values, I didn't set up to set a stationery company. I set up to create a way of procurement people to reimagine their role, reimagine their spend, and reimagine the reach they could have in the world. And guys like Robin, who's very, very dear to me, he said, well, you've bought into us in this office supplies thing. Can we please talk to you about? And so we started talking. We've got other propositions like document storage and print and digital print and all these different business spends. But one of the things that I know Robin will touch on this later, through our WildHearts schools, WildHearts talent, as we call it, and specifically Microcycle, our purpose-driven entrepreneurship program, these are completely eclectic product offerings But the unifying force is no, they're all designed to create value in the world, social value, if you will. And so one thing that's very, very exciting is whether it's a Barclays or a Nestle or a Zurich Insurance, Robin's peers in these companies or the heads of talent say, well, I like what WildHearts have done here. And they introduce us to other leads in the business that no other business would actually have the permission in their minds to have that conversation. Because there isn't what unites an entrepreneurship training program with the place where you buy your envelopes from, you know what I mean? But in WildHearts it does. So I wanted to create an engine that could create value. And I didn't want to ask for donations because I didn't want to compete with charities that needed it. I would feel a bit of a hollow victory if I was competing against people that were trying to address cancer or look after vulnerable kids. I wanted to create the value. And that was the founding ethos. We say we're in the empowerment business. We empower guys like Robin to use his influence in a different way, in the same way we empower micro entrepreneurs in Malawi or kids in inner cities to find their entrepreneurial self. To us, in my mind, we're empowering the individual to then take action in the way that's right for them, within the context that's right for them.
So before I move to you, Robin, so the business and the revenue generated from the business now goes into your foundation, which is the educational arm, the youth, at least the youth empowerment and educational arm. Can you just name that and just say a few words about that? And then I want to move over to you, Robin, to talk about the whole gestalt of this.
It was interesting, like when we started the first business, we said, right, what we'll do is we'll generate the profits and we'll put it into the foundation. And we did that so there was complete transparency and people, it could be monitored and audited, et cetera, et cetera. As we've evolved, more and more actually our businesses, our social businesses in the UK are creating the value and the revenue to fund our education program because it's grown significantly. Our foundation now really focuses on international work. So for example, our foundation owns, if a foundation can own something, the largest bank for the rural poor micro entrepreneurs, female micro entrepreneurs in Malawi and Zambia. And we also operate in Zimbabwe. So our empowerment, international empowerment, is facilitated through our foundation. But all the revenue comes from the WildHearts Group, whether it's the foundation doing the work or the WildHearts Group empowering kids in schools through our companies. The revenue is all coming from the same place.
Got it.
So, but it's very interestingly, and something you and I have talked about a lot, and you know you've been a massive influence on me, the idea that you can create profit to fund something, but when you become really close to leaders in a company like Zurich or Nestle, and they start saying, oh, we could do this together, you're actually unlocking exponential value that's way more in terms of monetary value than the profits you can make. And I think that gets very exciting when you think, imagine if these global brands just started flexing their muscles for good because they want to. My passion is to help to work with them to create ways together that we can do that.
Thank you. So, Robin, the vision and I would say our Babson's vision is for us to educate entrepreneurial leaders to create economic and social value simultaneously. You are doing that. And, you know, most companies and Mick knows this, that Emily and myself on this line have spent many, many years in the world of corporate social responsibility. This is not, to me, this is business as unusual. This is not usual business. This is about creating economic and social value simultaneously. That is a core value that it seems you're expressing. So can you tell us how you started the relationship with Mick and WildHearts, and what value have you brought, and what value has it created inside of Nestle for you?
Okay, good question. As a start point, I think sometimes, I might be stating the obvious here, but people sometimes forget that a business, and a large business like ours, we're the biggest food and beverage company in the world, is still made up of individuals who all have their own values, morals, things that make them wake up in the morning and make them go. And so for me, I mean, we've been working on a global responsible sourcing program. I'm the responsible sourcing manager for the UK, and so I sit within procurement. And really, and I've been working with dairy farmers and other farmers and implementing things. But going back to my point earlier about sort of social mobility, equality, I wasn't feeling that I'd actually managed to be able to do something concrete around that myself. And then it just so happened that, WildHearts, I can't even remember exactly how the introduction was made, but they came to see me and just said, look, this is what we're about. And, we have, just by changing your procurement from the same supplies you've always had for office supplies, if you buy from us, then you can start to help us start this journey of social mobility. So being able to drive that in the UK. And people don't realize this, but in the UK, we're the second worst in Europe for social mobility. So the postcode that you're born in pretty much is going to determine how your life is going to pan out. And that's not really about your race or your gender. It's about its socioeconomic background. Some of these are poor white boys, and but they're just, it's just where they're born. And so the Microcycle program was this real kind of realization. And then when Mick and the WildHearts team said, but also we do microfinancing to women in the developing world, and also we've got this Starts Her program in sub-Saharan Africa, it just, everything kind of came together. It's like, this is what social enterprises can really do. And what I was able to do is, actually, when you talk to people, when we spoke to people in the business and said, this is the opportunity we've got, why shouldn't we go for it? And then it probably helped that it wasn't costing us any more money either to make the switch. Then as a business person, you've got all your bases covered. And we were able to, it was still a bit of a leap of faith in my organization to do it. But that's what we did. But then as Mick touched on, that was just the start point. Then we realized we could actually work together to bring Microcycle into our organization. So that entrepreneurial thinking, we're putting all our apprentices through it, our graduates through the program, marketing people. And what's really I love about what the whole Microcycle approach is that it is all values based, and it's all about how can you bring back social values. So it isn't about making as much money as you can just for the business, which really does connect with a lot of people. It doesn't connect with everyone by any means, but it connects with a lot of people. And then so all of that together has just allowed us to develop the program. And now we're working on a schools program, which we're both very, very excited about, because it potentially will allow us to do things like give apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship training skills, employability skills to young people 16, 17, 18, and through our volunteering program. So again, getting lots of people in Nestle involved, we can use our expertise and our skills to show, to coach these children through, this is how you do a CV, this is how you could coach them through the first kind of interview before they've ever had an interview. And the power of that, as I said, is if you're a young person who's come from a background where you've never had exposure to anything like this, just having someone from a company like Nestle, or it could be Barclays or wherever, just having that conversation with you can really potentially transform the start of your life. So that's what I find really exciting about it. But what I love about it is that it's really, it's actually not that difficult to get other people on board, because these are just human values that everyone, most people have got. So I guess that's in a nutshell. I've tried to kind of summarize how we got into it, really.
Well, it's interesting that you say it's not really a big deal. It's just values. But that's why when we say values in action, you actually act on them. And, every time I hear you or Mick talk about it, it's so brilliant. What you've done is brilliant, Mick, because I can't imagine that you thought that back to RISE values, around collective impact for the greater good, that values are a framework for doing that Microcycle just spreads its wings in so many ways. It's not only about youth getting understanding the entrepreneurial mindset, But Robin, it's the back door. It's what every company is looking for more entrepreneurial managers and more entrepreneurial administrators and people. And they're not everybody is going to a Babson, not everybody is taking a course, but you're doing it through an engaged program that's fun, that's working with youth. And oh, by the way, when you finish this program, you're now so much more valuable to Nestle because you have an entrepreneurial mindset with a social design frame for creating economic and social value. Everybody's trying to add it on. You're building it into the DNA, which is, every time I hear this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant.
And you realize that everyone is really linked. Mick, I'd love you to talk about bees, because that's the linkage. That's a good example of how a girl at primary school and someone who's done Microcycle at Nestle, how we all actually have got the same, potentially got the same values. I'll leave you to explain it, Mick, because you do better than me.
Go ahead, Mick. Take it away.
Well, I think I have a well-earned reputation in Nestle that I'm like a sponge, and they'll say things to me, and next thing I'll come back with a strategy or something. So I was listening to, very interestingly from Robin, like the quite remarkable work they're doing in sustainability, and the answers to these challenges are not easy, right? Like, how are we going to feed a population of 10 billion? And I'm learning all this stuff from them. So at the same time, Nestle's graduates were doing Microcycle Innovate. So Microcycle Innovate, you learn 11 stages of entrepreneurial thinking. And then you have to come up with an idea, a sustainable business idea to address the global goals, right? So Nestle's grads are doing it, and it was incredible, the results they produced. At the same time, I'm working, and all kids get it free of charge. Brands like Nestle enable us to give it to all kids free, and over 50,000 have done it so far. These adorable little kids in junior school in the UK were standing up in front of hundreds of people and presenting on their plan for addressing the decline in the bee population by having bee gardens in their primary school, right? And the kids were amazing. And I'm hearing the Nestle graduates talking at a higher level of their strategy for addressing the decline in the bee population by having beehives in all Nestle locations. So then the HR saying, we want to attract the best talent to the business. How do we communicate? And you do know you're all passionate about the same thing. You just need to have the conversation. So Nestle's graduates and apprentices and leaders will be mentoring kids in all these schools, but talking about things like, well, how are we going to address soil degradation? And how are we going to stop the decline in the bee? And because the kids care about the same stuff that Nestle are wrestling with. So if you want to attract top talent, you support the same sports team, you just don't know it, right? That's the conversation you guys can be having. And so that's what really kicked off this really exciting strategy for us to go into schools and empower kids. And one thing, you already know about this, Cheryl, because I spoke about how Babson is going to be involved, and it's really exciting. Can I touch on something just about values? And I'll say this really briefly, but it's such an insight. I when I remember going to business schools in the past, and everything was about how you do stuff, how you do this and how you do this and how you do that, right? And I remember I'd written out the 11 stages of the Microcycle method, and I always tell this story because I said, what do you think, Cheryl? Is it all there? And you said, make one change. You've put why you do what you do third, put it first, right? And I made that change, and that was your advice. And you went, apart from that, you've got it. So I'm speaking to people and they say, how do I make my presentations better? Or how do I feel more motivated? Or how can I be more persuasive? Or how can I have more how can I do all these things? And the answer to all of it is know why you're doing it, because it will make you more persuasive. It will make you more compelling. It will make you a better leader because people will see it in your eyes. Now, you don't have to be jumping up and high-fiving everybody, but when people see that you are the real deal and you're doing it for a deeper reason than just paying the rent, the magic starts happening. When the magic really starts happening is when you start making friends that all share those values, because that's when you start getting a movement of change, and that's the excitement. It always comes back to your values, always.
Well, it's so interesting because everybody on this line, I imagine, and most people who are at the summit are trying to solve some kind of societal dilemma. We're all trying to solve complex issues. And they're not business issues. They're not about, you do this and this. But I always say to our business students, business is just complicated, and you can learn what to do. Solving, and when you're solving business problems, that's complicated. When you're solving social problems, that's complex. And to your point, if you don't start with the why, what we used to always say at Babson in our youth programs, don't fall in love with the solution, fall in love with the problem. What is the why? And so, Robin, you spoke to it. And Mick, I've known you now for almost 10 years, and the program has evolved. And it's evolved because you didn't fall in love with a solution. You fell in love with a problem, and you created incrementally along the way iterations of how you, with the resources you have at the time, what you could do. Today, the resources available to you through Robin and through Nestle and through other people allows you to have the conversation you're now having, because your values were front and center. And that's what attracted you to, and Robin, to you. So as we think about solving problems, if we can back away, and I think that a woman named Roseanne Haggerty, who is a leading social innovator in the United States who is eradicating homelessness, she says that when solving a social problem, sometimes your current innovation is going to be the enemy of your ability to make the impact you want to make, because we fall in love with our innovation at the time. And because social problems are complex and change, you have to, and I think you've even said it, or Rise even says it, that values are a constant state of evolution depending on experience and knowledge. And so you have evolved over so much over the 10 years, and I give it to your leadership, and we call it entrepreneurial leadership, that you're always evolving for what you're trying to solve. So Robin, how does that map to how you think inside? You're in a large company, and as you said, there are probably some disbelievers at the beginning. How, you spoke a little bit, can you speak a little bit more around the lever you use to be able to make the change you do? Because I think it's brilliant to start with procurement, and particularly someone who's in charge of responsible sourcing, because that is at the heart of your business.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, it's the way I've gone about it actually is you start to it's about knowing, for a start, it's about knowing your colleagues. Yeah. And you then, what that allows you to do is you then start to identify who has got similar values to you just through getting to know them and all of that. And then you start going to those people that you think will be allies. Yeah. And that's what I started to do is to identify those allies. Start small. We started with, managed to go to Sarah, who heads up our kind of apprentice scheme and graduate scheme, said, look, I've got an idea here. I've got an organization that potentially, with their Microcycle approach, can potentially why don't we just give it a go? And once you start the ball rolling and somebody tries it and you start to make it work, then suddenly the number of people who know about it and the people who get behind it starts to grow. But the other thing you have to do, particularly in an organization like any kind of large organization, is you really need to try and get senior buy-in as well, somebody at a senior level who's going to get it. And in my case, I was fortunate that I knew the HR director. I've known him for many years, and was able to just go to him, and I persuaded him to, in one of his HR leadership meetings, just get Mick in, and for Mick to do his magic, and that was it. All of a sudden, we had him kind of turned onto the idea, and then from that you start to make some progress. But it's interesting because, as I said, not everybody is engaged, and one of the other areas you have to, I think, if I were to do this again, if I had the opportunity to do it different, I think one thing that I would potentially change is try and get to the finance people quicker, because they are they hold the purse strings, or they will challenge where you're spending your money. But actually, if you get them involved early, and as I said, everyone's people, and and many of them will have similar values to you, you can get to them as well. But the benefits also that you start to see, and again, we were able to I was able to use this is that if you want to increase staff engagement, within your business, when staff start to hear about, this is what Microcycle does, this is how we're helping social mobility, this is how we're helping women in the developing world, to set up their businesses, then staff start to get more motivated, and then you start to get that staff engagement goes up. And then what happens is you then find out, well, actually your staff retention goes up. People don't leave as quickly because they feel better for working for the business. And then what happens actually is then you get your talent attraction gets better. More people want to join the business, and particularly younger people who are really into sustainability and all the things that we're working on. It just becomes easier to recruit. So you just start to see all of these added benefits from something that starts quite small, but actually starts to grow incrementally. Yeah. So
yeah. And just
Cheryl.
one thing I would ask you, if you had gone to, okay, I'll come back to that. Yes, Mick, were you going to say something?
That fantastic research you did with Verizon and Campbell's, was it? We still cite that, this idea about, people, you get these chief execs saying, how am I going to engage customers, attract the top talent, and motivate my current team? You have to give them a more engaging reason than just their salary. Of course, life is expensive, right? Of course. But after a while, all the research about, especially millennials, leaving companies, taking a pay cut to work for a company that has more contribution to society. Like this business, the program, and sorry, not to take up too much time, but one thing that really impressed me was this amazing academy, marketing academy in Nestle, and they asked us to come in and work with their people, literally cutting edge of creating the campaigns or all the aspects of marketing for Nestle, right? So it's a bit of a marketer's dream when you think of a graduate wanting to join a company. And they had aggregated, as they call them, gurus. Robin was one of them. They had someone doing a talk on childhood obesity, health. They had another guy talking about palm oil and sustainability in rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa. Different experts coming in, because the message was for the sophistication and values of consumers. The days of a nice wrapper and talking about how nice your candy is not enough. People say, where do you get it? How did it get here? How are the people treated that produced it? What will it? I mean, the marketer's job now is to communicate the values that a guy like Robin is championing in the business, because he's the one dealing with where they're sourcing and stuff. And it's wonderful, because it's immensely challenging. And Robin here did an amazing podcast for us. He deals with it with real humility. But the issues here he's dealing with and where he's going to source his products are the issues that keeps us awake at night when we think about our kids. Like, how can he procure sustainable products and get them to people in a way that's not going to damage the environment? Those are the questions of the age, and that's his day job. And it's only by values that we're going to bring this to life.
Well, and I think what you're doing, Mick, and what you're doing, Robin, you're creating a pathway, a journey from a young person to your customers of values in action. It's not a brochure, it's not an ad. And I will make sure, by the way, Karen, that I will put some links on the web, because there is a great podcast with Robin and Mick and a few other things. But, we're all talking about something that's so integral to business. And Robin, if you had started with your chief financial officer, I remember when Emily and I were at Boston College, we had the chief financial officer for UPS, and we had never had a chief financial officer speak this was 15 years ago, at a corporate citizenship conference, because those were usually the people who were saying, don't spend any more money out of your philanthropy. But he got up and he spoke with real conviction about values. So if you were to go today to your CFO, knowing what you know now, what kind of metrics what would be the conversation, the opening conversation? What metrics if knowing what you know now, would you walk through the door and knowing their language? What would you say? Because the report that Mick refers to is the chief financial officers of Campbell Soup Company and Verizon gave us money to do research on the return on investment of social and environmental programs inside of large multinational corporations. And it was a great report, and it was really very useful. But they wanted to know because, every year the head of the foundation would come in for another $40 million, and the CFO would say, well, what's the return on investment? And nobody thought about that in the philanthropy world or what they're doing. But now you actually have stories, and you actually have metrics to that return on investment. So would you go today with some new metrics?
Well, I think where the world is now is just so interesting, because there's a lot of big issues kind of coming together, and actually for any business, this actually, it should be at the heart of what they're doing. So actually now, I mean, for instance, you've more and more businesses are realizing that if you don't have a diverse, inclusive organization, or put it the other way, if you do have a really diverse, inclusive organization, all the metrics show that you are going to sell more product. You are actually going to have a happier workforce. You can have a much more innovative workforce. So this whole kind of diversity and inclusion and being more diverse is already, businesses are realizing that. At the same time, the investment community, so the shareholders of companies like Nestle, are realizing that actually the world's resources are being depleted, that if they don't start to invest in sustainable solutions through these companies, they're not going to have a business to invest in 20, 30 years time. So all the stuff we're doing around regenerative agriculture and that is all, that is now making more sense if you're the CFO. Then you've got programs like the Blue Planet and all the rest, just showing how bad plastic is, and consumers and NGOs are turning on big business, and I think rightly so, to clean up their act around packaging, plastics, that kind of thing. So again, you've got the consumer pool, you've got the NGO pool. As I said, you've got climate change happening, and just for instance, this year the wheat harvest in the UK was 40% down. It was the worst harvest for 45 years. We make shredded wheat, it's a big brand dependent on wheat. But not only that, Kit Kat, it's a huge brand. There's wheat flour that goes into Kit Kat, and therefore you've got all of these big global, all the things that behind you, the SDGs, all of these things are happening, coming together. And actually any business that doesn't face into all of this now is really going to lose out long term anyway. So from a CFO perspective, when you go in, when I go in there and say we've got this solution around regenerative agriculture, we've got a solution for packaging, we've got a potential solution for all the social inequality that's going on, we've got a way that we can have a much more diverse supplier base. You go to social enterprises and they have, the social enterprises in the UK have far more women in charge than men. Not far more, but more than the average business. They have more ethnically diverse people in charge, more people with disabilities in charge, more people from the LGBT community in charge. So you actually start working with them. So all of these things are coming together quite nicely, and so actually in some ways it's making my job a bit easier, which it wasn't 3-4 years ago. So that's what I would take to the CFO now, and he or she would get it.
That's terrific. So I want to ask each one of you something, and then Karen, do you want me to open up for questions? Well, whatever you'd like, but I wanted to ask each one of you, I'd love you to pick one defining story of Wildhearts and Microcycle that best describes the values that Nestle cares about and that Wildhearts cares about. And Mick, it could be with another company as well, or it could be with anyone, but you've got, and I also encourage everybody who's on this Zoom call to please listen to the podcast and go to the Wildhearts site, because some of the videos of young kids and what they are learning around entrepreneurship and gender equity. My favorite little boy is a boy that talks about his experience of raising 14,000 pounds, and he looks in the camera to talk about his positive experience, and he looks at wide-eyed and he goes, and it's almost like he was shocked. And he said, and I really learned that I like working with girls. They're really smart or something like that. And I
That's right.
thought to myself, where else do you authentically get kids? You know, they're always competitive in school and it's boys and girls and whatever. But this boy looks in the camera and I just said, this program, it was just so incredible. And just if you hear their voices about what they learn, it's extremely. So if you could each share one story that exemplifies values in action, that would be awesome.
Would you like to go first, Rob?
Should I go?
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Before you go first, Robin, I'll say this in one sentence before you go, Robin. That little boy is famous, Cheryl, for I've spoken at global conferences and the place erupts when he says I had to work with girls and his face is like this. And he said, but then at the end, you know, he says, I learned that it's not much how much money you have, it's how much imagination you have in your heart. And the way a kid thinks imagination comes from his heart, and I was like, oh, okay, this kid is just yeah, he's famous.
It was
yeah. Thanks. Over to you, Robin, please.
Well, I think for me, the story that I think was the moment when I realized I was working. I mean, I always felt that I was working in a business that was you know, we don't have the best reputation in the world in some places, but I've been here for 25 years. And one of the reasons that I stayed is partly the people, but partly because I felt that we were trying to do the right thing. We're not perfect, but we're trying to do the right thing. But the moment was about 4 years ago when for various reasons, I was working with our dairy farmers, and for a number of things came together which really impacted the dairy farmers. So China decided not to import as much milk as they used to. They kind of cut off a whole load of imports. Russia decided to stop importing anything from Europe because of the political situation at the time. So suddenly there was this huge glut of milk, and so the milk price crashed. It went from, it was averaging sort of 28, 29 pence per litre, and it crashed to below 18 pence per litre. And I turned around to my business and I said, so normally we would be paying, you know, the average milk price. We pay a premium, but not like a massive premium. And I turned around to the business and said, we've got to really look after our farmers. If we're serious about responsible sourcing, and we've got to look after them. So I suggested that we keep the price really high. It was at 27 at 28 pence per litre. And I suggested we keep it for a whole year. And that was the impact on our profit, not profit, but in the impact in terms of spend was many millions of pounds. And the business turned around and basically said, yes, we've got to do it. I didn't have to try that hard. The business said we have to support them, and that's what we did. And I had two farmers contact me and said, we've had our farms in the family business for generations. We would have gone out of business without your support. And it was at that moment I realized, yeah, no, this business actually is willing to do the right thing.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great story. Thank you. And Mick, what about you?
So many, but I think the woman who inspired the creation of Microcycle. So Wildhearts started in finance for predominantly female micro entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa. Now we're also in places like Haiti and India, etc. And we had a client in Ghana who I already knew about. She had no idea I knew who she was. Her name's Hawa. And she was disabled, friendless, illiterate, beggar before she was invited into the group. So the women in the banking group decide who they want in their group. It's their group, right? That's why the repayment rates are so immense. We have a less than 0.5% portfolio at risk. As a little side story, I mentioned that as a footnote while presenting at a major global bank in Geneva. To all these bankers, and the head of the bank stopped me and went, no, that's impossible. He said, how can you get such repayment rates? He says, well, because you don't default on the people you love. That's why. And these women all are in the village, and so therefore they don't have a contract, they have a bond, and it's totally different. So these women invited Hawa into their group, and she burst out crying. I wasn't there, I'd heard of this. I said, why do you want me? Like, she had had polio since she was a child. The police used to kick her and spit on her to make her move. So this woman, when I was sitting doing a talk to these female micro entrepreneurs in Ghana, she came in and she literally dragged herself in with flip-flops on her hands on the ground. And at the end of it, so I'm sitting in awe of her, and she doesn't know I know about her. She pulled herself up onto a little buggy, which wasn't easy to do, and then scooted off on her little bicycle, which she rode with her hands, right? Her life, the challenges of being that significantly disabled in a rural sub-Saharan African country doesn't bear thinking about. So I wanted to go and visit her, and I went to see her in a stall, and there she was, like people all around her, and she was like really like a bit of an influencer, to say the least. She got a £96 loan from us when she started, and when I went to see her in her stall, she was a leading spice retailer in the whole market. So I'm looking at her again. This woman's a force of nature, and she was already extrapolating into cereals. And she's a bit of a local celebrity and so humble. So I'm looking at it, and coming from the West, I said, how did you manage to set up a spice stall? Like, how did you do it, right? And the translator looked at me and spoke to her, and then she looked at me like I was stupid, and she spoke to the translator, and he looked at me and said, she cycled around the market and identified a gap. As if she was like, duh, right? We had that spirit in the West, so many of our problems would evaporate. And I looked at my ancestors who literally walked to the boat in their bare feet, carrying their one pair of shoes, that attitude of, I have nothing, but I've got my spirit and it will triumph. And that's what she had. And it was that I thought, okay, I'm going to try and borrow what she's got and bring it to kids in the UK.
Yeah.
It's interesting when, there's so much stuff going on just now. I think too many people talking about what separates us rather than what unites us. So Robin and I talk, and we talk as kids of immigrants. We bond over that, right? Even though we're from other part, our immigrant forefathers were from other sides of the world. When I say as a white European male that my entrepreneurial hero is a disabled sub-Saharan African woman, people kind of go, okay, never heard that before. Do you know what I mean? And that's our message. It's like, it's that unifying spirit and those values of the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity and solve problems. And she's my role model. And she has gone on to inspire entrepreneurial education for over 50,000 kids all around the world. And she has no idea. She has no idea.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Well, that is a wonderful, both of you have perfect stories to sort of end this values in action. Mick and Robin, I could probably stay and talk to you. And the second I can get on an airplane, I'm coming to Scotland and I'm coming to. But I want to turn it over to Karen, and I can't thank you enough. Especially at a time like now when everything is so unpredictable and crazy and complex. The fact of the matter is what the partnership you have, what you each do individually as, I would say, entrepreneurial leaders in your world, what you do with such values-driven, energy is really what's going to help us with these global goals behind me, but really bring a new generation that we're not going to aren't going to wait for the companies they're in to do this. They're coming through the door now. They're coming to Babson this way. They're coming to Babson asking us to look at our own footprint. They are asking questions. They're curious. And I was privileged enough to go to Geneva for a summit with Mick at the UN with these young kids. And I remember being with one group working on UN global goal around zero hunger. And I was blown away by the imagination and the ability to think completely unrestrained. And that's what we need. We need leaders like you, Robin, inside of companies who have radical, unrestrained energy around good values. And Mick, what you do, I can't even imagine what the next 10 years will look like. But thank you both so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm going to say A really, really big thank you. I think it was so amazing to hear this. And I know that when we start sharing it with our own Indian audiences, we're going to find that, this is going to be so inspirational. I think at two levels, and luckily we do have both of you representing that. One is at the youth level in terms of what is it that is possible. And the story about the female entrepreneur, I think just shows us that there are no boundaries to being able to be successful with the kind of programs that you're doing, if the values are right and they're put as part and as part of the design of the programs and initiatives that you're doing. And Robin, to kind of say what you said about corporates and large entities realizing that there is value in the values they put into the design again of their own processes and policies, because one is about the way the RISE values work is, we'd say, responsible procurement, which is a very simple no-brainer. But then you have to also have inclusive policies, because you can always be responsible in many, many ways, but that still does not necessarily mean that you are inclusive. And so a lot of these things, with the values in action, which I just love what Cheryl is doing, is so important, because it's the nuances that make the difference in really what is it that you want to achieve at the end of these kind of programs. So thank you so very much. And we truly appreciate having you at the RISE World Summit. You really have made it epitome of what values in action mean. Thank you so much. Cheryl, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you both very, very much.